So how can we affect and control the rate of a reaction? Because maybe we want a reaction to be fast, or maybe we want it to be slow. So it turns out there's three factors that affect the rate of a reaction. One is the temperature, and we normally find that the higher the temperature is, the faster the reaction is, and the slower it is, the colder it is. Concentration. In the lab, we often use highly concentrated solutions to make the reactions occur much more quickly, and dilute solutions when we want to slow them down. And the third thing is the presence of what we call a catalyst, and we'll look at all three of these factors in turn. So let's start with temperature. So what's going on with temperature? Well, we know that the molecules are constantly moving, and so if we look at the number of molecules moving at a particular speed, what we notice is that as the molecules are cold, most of them are moving relatively slowly. And so if speed increases to the right, we can see at low temperatures, most of them are moving at a relatively low speed here. So this is cold, so this is a low temperature, I suppose. And as we heat it up, what we find is that the distribution shifts. So it shifts to the right. And if we are at high temperature, so that is hot, then you get a peak that is further to the right than before. So it's over here as opposed to over here. So what you find is the higher the temperature is, the more molecules are moving at a higher speed, and the colder it is, more of them are moving at a lower speed. The thing to remember, of course, is that they don't all move at the same speed. There's a distribution of speeds. And how does this affect the rate of a reaction? Well, there is a particular activation energy that is related to the speed. It's not quite the same thing, but you can think of it in the same kind of terms. And so there's a minimum energy the molecules have to move with. And if you're at a higher temperature, then more and more of these molecules, represented by the area under this curve, are going to have at least that energy in order to bump in and react. Whereas if you're at a cold temperature, you can see the tail out here, very, very small. So very few molecules are going to have a speed necessary to react. What we find is that normally it's an exponential kind of dependence. And so if you look at the rate of a reaction versus the temperature, if you increase the temperature by just a couple of degrees, sometimes the rate will double. So you can see if you increase it by another couple of degrees, it'll double some more and double some more, and you get that very famous exponential function here. So you go up by a small amount of temperature, and I think very, very roughly, if you go up by about 3 degrees Celsius, then your reaction speed increases by about a factor of 2. So you get that exponential increase there. The second of the three factors is concentration. So you might imagine if you have a very low concentration, that just means that there's a very small number of molecules in a given volume. So if they're trying to collide with each other, right, there's just a very small chance that they can collide with each other when the concentration is low. So if there's a lower chance of collision, then there's going to be a lower rate of reaction. Whereas if the concentration is much higher, that means that there's far more molecules of reactants. This is starting to look like a pudding or something, isn't it? So there's just a lot more packed in there. So, oh gosh, this is taking a little while to draw, isn't it? So let's be sloppy there. And if there's a lot more in there, that just means that there's a lot more opportunity then for them to bump into each other. So if they're moving in the same direction, and they have at least an energy greater than or equal to the, do you remember? Yep, the activation energy, then they can bump into each other and they can react. And so this is a high concentration cross-section, and so it just means that they've got a greater chance of collision, which gives rise to a greater rate of reaction. The third factor is the presence or absence of a catalyst. And so a catalyst is basically something that allows the reaction to take place via a different mechanism. So you can think of a catalyst as sort of one of those private roads, right, that you can pay to drive on. Oh wait, do those exist? Maybe turnpikes. So without a catalyst, then you've got to go the long way round. So here are your reactants, and here are your products. And you got to go all the way up the top right. So you got this activation energy barrier here. Here's your transition state and your activated complex here. So without, so W-O-T, O-U-T is without catalyst, or CAT for short. It looks something like that. And so imagine, though, that the catalyst gave you another way you could do this reaction. Instead of having to go through that very big barrier, you can actually sneak around another way, a much smaller way, right? And that gives you a much smaller activation energy. And so we've seen before, right? The smaller the activation energy, the faster the reaction. So if you've got a catalyst, right, so it lowers that barrier. And what's interesting actually is the reactants and products are in the same place. So if it's exothermic or endothermic, that doesn't change at all. But without a catalyst, that barrier is enormous. Okay, that high activation energy means the molecules are going to slam into each other much more rapidly, and that's much, much harder, so a much lower probability. But with a catalyst present, right, then you've got that much smaller barrier. The neat thing about a catalyst is that they're not used up in a reaction, so they're not consumed, and so that means that you can basically recycle them. And in your body, these catalysts are often called enzymes. And so a big part of DNA is to produce enzymes that catalyze certain reactions. Otherwise, the reactions in your body might take hours or days to, say, digest food. And with the catalyst, they can digest them in just minutes flat, maybe.